Meantime, we shall move on to tracks 1 and 2, onto the talks by Stuart, Minu and Ramya.
Hello everybody, welcome to my presentation, Web UI Testing with Cypress. Thank you all for taking the time to join me, and hopefully you'll find this interesting and potentially even useful in your test automation efforts in the future. This is something that's very important to us in ESO, our mission, to make a difference by improving community health and safety through the power of data. A little brief introduction to me. I'm Stuart Cave, and that's my mugshot up in the top right. I'm a senior software development engineer in test, otherwise known as an SDET, currently working at ESO. After dabbling in software testing during my placement year in the Northern Bank, now known as the Danske Bank, I've since spent the last 14 years in this field, holding a variety of different roles, such as automation engineer, performance engineer, test lead, test manager, test architect. Throughout my career, I've seen a fair amount of evolution in the test automation tool space, starting out with a good old WinRunner, and moving on to QTP, UFT, Selenium, RC, Selenium WebDriver. So with 9 years experience in Selenium, you might be asking, why would I want to change that if it's not broken? Well, what if it is broken? What if there's something that it doesn't do? What if there's something out there that does it faster, more reliably, and makes test automation a better all-round experience for the engineers? So enter Cypress. What exactly is it? They claim it's an all-in-one testing framework, meaning that you don't need to set up and install a raft of different tools and technologies just to get it up and running. As you can see on the left, before Cypress, typically you would have to pick and manage various bits and pieces and pull them all together and manage it all separately, whereas with Cypress it all comes bundled together, making the installation process simple. Most importantly, what differentiates it and the other end-to-end testing tools out there is that it's not built on and does not depend on Selenium. So you can test anything in your browser. The test runner itself is completely open source and free. There is a web-based subscription cloud dashboard model, which obviously you pay for. You can execute your tests on that, and they will store and host the results for you. But Cypress itself actually runs inside of your web application, which is very different to how your traditional testing tools work, and we'll talk about a little bit more about that in a minute. It is JavaScript only, so there are no client bindings for other languages, such as Selenium. So how does it work? Tests are written in JavaScript only, or anything that can transpile into JavaScript, like TypeScript, for example. You can use your favorite IDE, like Atom, Visual Studio Code, etc. It uses pretty simple commands like type, click, select, clear, set, and so on. They're all pretty self-explanatory, and there's a lot of good supporting documentation about them out there. It bundles with jQuery, so you can use familiar jQuery-like selectors. It also exposes native DOM traversal methods for cool stuff like .children, .first, .parent, etc. All very handy when it comes to trying to find that unique browser element that you're trying to interact with. It uses Mocha for your Mocha framework for the test execution, so your describe and your it blocks, and then it uses Chai for assertions, so checking things are visible, checking it has a certain value, it's enabled, disabled, etc. Which you can see there, it can be used in BDD or TDD type syntax. There's a friendly UI for test execution, whereby you can actually see the test running in the browser as well as the steps as they execute, whether they pass and fail in real time. You can also run it in a headless mode, which is useful for your CI builds. Cypress uses a chained command mechanism, whereby the promise of each command returns the subject onto the next command. As you can see here in the example, Cypress will select a jQuery object that has an ID of login button, and then it will pass that subject to the click command, which will then in turn click it. So these are what Cypress say differentiates it from other tools out there. As you go, it'll automatically snapshot your application state at each test step, which is really useful for debugging. You can go back and see the DOM state before and after each action. So before you click a button, the state, after you click it, what state it is, as well as inbuilt screenshots, which also are handy. The inbuilt waiting for commands and assertions up until a configurable and overridable timeout value. So there's no more waiting for X to happen, waiting until Y. Because Cypress runs in the same loop as your application, it will listen to the native browser events for you automatically. And due to this, Cypress is also extremely fast. There are no wire calls between your test code and the browser itself. So think of polling for something in Selenium. The code will have to communicate back and forward, waiting for something to happen many times. That's further exacerbated with remote executions on the likes of Selenium Grid. You can also make headless requests to set up application state. For example, log in and then navigate directly to a page and then open that page itself and maintain all that session that you set up in the login process. So all your session variables and cookies are set as if you had logged in normally. Stubbing and mocking, you can intercept HTTP calls and stub them, so you don't need to rely on third-party services to be available, or maybe they're a paid-for model, so you don't want to hit them too many times. You can also manipulate the payload that it returns to your browser. So, for example, I could set the response of something to be true, which would show a field. I can then test that, and then I could then also set it false and test it without ever having to hit the server or change any data. UI developers are also using Cypress for testing, which I always think anything that gets the developers thinking about testing themselves is always a good thing. So these are just some things that I've found to be pretty cool in my time so far using Cypress. The selector playground, which is featured in the screenshot there, lets you learn and test your selectors in the test runner itself. So you can click on an HTML element and it will highlight it and show you a valid selector that would enable you to interact with that. You can also paste in your selectors that you've maybe developed in Google Chrome or Firefox to test them, and it will highlight them in the browser and show you how many attributes or how many elements match that. As I mentioned on the previous slide, the headless requests are very useful. So in my application, I have a login function that will set all my state, and then I can just visit any page that's behind the authentication that I need. I make a post request to the login form with the credentials, and then check response values, cookies, headers, etc. And then I can just open up any page that I need to. This is really fast compared to going to the browser, submitting a form, and waiting for an HTML page to load up. There's no need to wait for elements to be visible or check that a page is loaded, or worse still, the dreaded thread sleeps that I'm sure you've seen plagued across many automation frameworks in your time. Cypress automatically waits for the browser events to complete for you. It is actively being developed. There's a nice open source community out there with people suggesting new features, voting on features, as well as a product roadmap. There are new versions released all the time with bug fixes and various new feature enhancements. There's tons of third-party extensions and plugins for all sorts of things out there, integrations, reporting frameworks, etc., which is really nice to see, and it shows that it is actively being used by the testing community. There's a built-in retry failing tests mechanism if it's required, which is nice. You can set a global retry value to automatically rerun any of your failed tests, or specifically certain tests. API testing, you can combine your API tests if you wish. As I mentioned before, you can make HTTP requests, you can supply the bodies, you can assert on responses, so it might be useful to have all your test automation in a single framework rather than having multiple different frameworks and technologies. There are loads of great examples and recipes, as Cypress call it, on their website to show off different functionality, different plugins, different features, and how you might go about using those. But as with all good things, there are some limitations. Cypress runs inside the browser, so it will only ever support JavaScript, and they're very clear about that on their website, that no other languages will ever be supported. Like some other automation tools, they struggle with multiple browser tabs or new multiple browser sessions concurrently. But instead they say that you should check that the link attribute would be as you expect, rather than clicking the link brings you to the place that you would expect it to bring you, which does kind of make sense. Why test the browser functionality? Brings you to a page. Why not check that your application has the correct link? Each test is bound to a single origin, so I cannot have a test that visits google.com and then goes to bing.com, but I can have separate tests that will visit those different origins. I guess the other thing that comes with just how widely used the tool is. When you go to search for a particular error or issue that you've maybe come across, you won't find as many posts on Stack Overflow or the likes that you would for Selenium, but there are certainly posts out there for some of the common problems that you might encounter. So the verdict, I've been using Cypress for around a year now, and I've been really, really impressed just with how stable and robust it is, both in terms of the test runner and also the test results. I can't remember the last time I had a failed test that didn't actually turn out to be a problem with the application or my test script or my test data. It means there are no tests that sometimes pass and sometimes fail with no clear reason. It's really helping to build confidence in the test automation that we have in place, and it means that failures are properly taken seriously and properly investigated. I'm not saying go and bin your mature Selenium-based test automation framework in favour of Cypress, or well, maybe I am. But if you are looking to get a new test, get started into test automation as a beginner or a novice, or you're looking to start testing a new web application, why not give a quick proof of concept with Cypress? I didn't want to pull down all the examples, videos, tutorials, and things that Cypress have on their website, so I suggest if you are interested, go visit their site. It's completely possible to get up and running with Cypress in literally a matter of minutes. Thank you for the time, and hopefully that was useful for you all.
Right, welcome back. Thanks for that last one, and that nice short and sweet one. Right, May interviewed me, so guess what we're going to do now?